of letters of recommendation as you prepare for the process of applying to grad school for what I'm assuming is going to be speech language pathology or audiology. If you fall outside of that category, we can certainly talk separately. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Eric Bielefeld. I am a professor in the department and the current department chair. I've talked to this group about letters of recommendation, I think the last maybe 2 years, and I think I hope it'll be beneficial. So please either chat any questions that you have as we go along or unmute yourself and ask any questions. But I'm just going to say a few things to get us started, and then most of the time will be left for me answering any questions that you might have. So the letters of recommendation are obviously a critical part of your applications. There are a few things I think that make them uniquely stressful for the student. And the first is that you need a minimum of 3, and there's room for a maximum of 5. What I can say with a reasonable amount of confidence is that the 4th and the 5th that you add very rarely are going to make a huge difference. So don't stress yourself out trying to think about finding a 4th or a 5th person. If you have 3 and you're comfortable with the 3 that you have, I would certainly say that you're going to be in a perfectly good spot with that. And so some of the questions that I'm most commonly asked about this first is who makes a good letter writer? In general, the advice that I've given in the past and I would give now is you want at least 2 of them to be faculty who've taught courses, or that you've done some kind of had some kind of learning experience with, whether that's coursework or clinical precepting experience, whatever the case may be. But you want faculty from your undergraduate program in some form or another who can speak to your aptitude as a student. And then the third one, I think there's a little bit of room to get more creative. So if you have somebody who you think can speak to you as a future clinician, if you have an employer, especially if you've been employed or done volunteer work in something related to healthcare, whether it's speech and hearing related or not, somebody like that, I think, makes some sense for the third letter. The things that I would avoid are anyone who has a personal relationship with you. So even if you have somebody who's in theory really well qualified to write a letter for you, but all they really know about you is the relationship they have with you in a social environment, or your family friends with them, something like that, it's unlikely that that letter is going to have a lot of impact. Similarly, if you work a job where the person doesn't really know that much about you, but can say, this person shows up on time, they do their job, that's often going to land a little bit flat too. And so you want somebody who can speak to really, I think, your aptitude both as a graduate student, but also as a clinician in speech language pathology or audiology. So zero in on that as much as you can. But again, if you have somebody who you have a working relationship with that's not directly in speech and hearing, if they can speak to, this person has really good interpersonal skills, this person is really punctual, they're really skilled at what they do, they're a fast learner, they're motivated, those are worthwhile things to have said about you. So I wouldn't necessarily shy away from that. But what you don't want to do is have too many of those and not enough of your faculty members represented. If there aren't enough faculty members represented, the taste that leaves in the reviewer's mouth is very likely to be, why couldn't this person find somebody to write for them amongst their faculty? Maybe you could have, but you just didn't. But the conclusion that you're susceptible to is that you couldn't find anybody. And that's something that you don't want, I think, when you're being reviewed. I just don't think that's the perception that you want to create about yourself. So the next question I often get is sort of the how do I ask and who do I ask kind of questions. The who do you ask, I think, is the faculty with whom you have, I think, what you would perceive as the best relationship. And I fully say that, recognizing that we have large classes, we have lecture-based classes. There's a really good chance that you've been an excellent student in the program. You've done everything that you needed to do, and you don't have, an interpersonal relationship with any of the faculty who've taught your classes or any of the faculty in the department. That's a very reasonable outcome for you to be at the stage that you're in. and it doesn't reflect negatively on you. But at the same time, if there's a class that you feel like you learned a lot, if there's a class where you really excelled, if there's a class that you can identify and say, hey, this is the reason that I wanted to be a speech language pathologist or an audiologist, all of those are really good jumping off points for asking that person to write for you. And so, what needs to happen if that person doesn't really know you very well? It's first of all, it would be very reasonable for them to decline in that case and say, like, hey, this isn't, I don't feel that comfortable. But I think in general, what you're going to get instead is that person's going to accept your request and then say, I want to talk to you more to get to know more about you so that I can personalize the letter more effectively. That's definitely what I do. I don't really turn people down unless they performed poorly in my classes. In that case, it's like I can't really say the person excelled in my classes if they didn't. I'm not going to say something that's not true. But if I don't really know that much about you other than got an A, you got an A minus, you got a B plus with me, something like that, then what my job is to find out more about you. And so when you reach out to that person, be prepared to send them materials about you, whether that's a copy of your personal statement drafts that you've written, if you have a resume or a CV, be ready to send that stuff to them so that they can start to pull things from that they want to highlight, that they think are going to make you look, as good as possible. Overall, I think I can speak on behalf of my faculty in the department in saying that our goal is to put you in the best possible position to succeed in your applications to graduate school. We are invested in you. We want to see that success for you. But it's also, for selfish reasons, it's good for us to have you guys moving on to the next level and going off to different universities and different colleges or staying at Ohio State and succeeding at the next level in grad school. So it's a win-win for us if you can get to that next level and thrive there. And so our goal is to put you in the best possible position to succeed. And so I think you'll get a lot of yeses. And so you might have a little bit of hesitation as your finger sort of settles over the mouse when you're about to click send on that message where you're going to ask. But don't be afraid to ask. Don't be hesitant. My expectation is that most of the time, again, what you're going to get is a yes, but with the caveat of like, hey, I want to read more about you, or I want to set up a meeting with you so that I can learn about the things that are going to be the most important to put into that letter. And so, I usually approach the letters that I write from one of two perspectives. Either you are in a position where your GPA, your, extracurricular activities, your experiences all create a story that looks really good. And all I view is my letter. I just needed to not screw things up for you. You've done all the work to build yourself up into somebody who should be a really attractive candidate to grad school. All I want to do is not make that worse. And that's a really low bar and one that I feel like I can consistently clear. The other camp is somebody who has some weaknesses in their resume. And that might mean, a 3.2, a 3.3, a 3.4, which is, again, nothing to apologize for, but it's going to put you at the lower end of the people who you're competing with for seats in the grad programs that you want to go to. And so if that's the case, or if you're a little bit thin in the, co-curricular, extracurricular, there's just not that much of a story to tell about you, then I feel like I need to find out more and dig more into your story and say, okay, what makes this person special as a candidate? And everybody has a unique story. Everybody has something about them that makes them an appealing candidate. Otherwise, you wouldn't be at this level already. And so it's just a matter of, me figuring out what that is. What is this sort of, what's the plot that I want to build about your candidacy that I want to build my letter around? And what's the point that I really want to hammer home to the reviewer of, hey, you might be viewing this person through a more negative lens because of the weaknesses in their resume or in their GPA, whatever the case may be. But here's why this person is somebody who's worth investing in. And so I think just look at your own case. And it's one of the hardest things to do is to be not only critical of yourself, but on the other end, say, hey, what are my strengths? What position, which of those two buckets do I fall into? Am I somebody who should be a really strong candidate, or am I somebody who needs that extra boost from the letter of recommendation? And you're obviously not going to tell that to the person who you're asking for the letter from. but it will, I think, help you get a sense for what do you need those letters to accomplish. But most importantly, come to the meeting or the email exchange that you have with your letter writers kind of prepared to, like, what story do you want them to tell? What are the things that you think are worth highlighting? It might be something as simple as, I really love being a, I really love the field of speech language pathology. I really have a great work ethic. Or it might be something that's a lot more unique and a lot more sort of special to you, that makes you, your story different from other people's. And so just be prepared to help the letter writer figure out the story about you, because, in all likelihood, they and we are not going to know as much about your story, certainly, as you do. And so be prepared for that person to ask you for some help in figuring out what the best story is to tell. And then, but don't be shy about it either. Don't be shy about telling that person why you're great. It's a lot easier for a letter writer to talk you up than it is in some cases yourself up. There are things that a letter writer may be able to pull out from a story that you yourself don't want to put into, a personal statement. And so if there are those things, let us, kind of brag about you in a way that you might not be comfortable bragging about yourself. Um, Always, when you go into the letter request, be as, I think, polite and formal as possible. You don't want to presume that the person is going to say yes, but make the letter, just ask as politely as you can, and I think you'll get a lot of yeses and very few nos. There are going to be situations. We have some of our faculty who teach a lot in the undergrad program. They teach high enrollment, high leverage courses. They might get a lot of requests. And so if you get a no, it might be simply that the person is kind of overwhelmed with requests, and there's only so many that they can honor while doing a good job. And so I think if you do get a no, that's going to be the reason why. It will not be a reflection on you. It's going to be more of just, we kind of want to spread that um, obligation out amongst as many of the faculty as we can. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you don't have the letters that you need, please reach out to me. I would be happy to write for any of our undergrads. Even if I haven't had you in class, I can figure out how to tell a story about you that will be compelling. And so I'm happy to do that. Again, I think I can speak on behalf of everybody and say that we want you to be successful. One of the questions that I also get is about if you had a graduate student teach a class for you. Is that somebody like a PhD student? Is that somebody who would make a good letter writer for you? I think the answer to that is kind of a break glass in case of emergency, which is to say, if there's anybody else that you can use who is a professor in the department, I would encourage you to use that person instead. If you don't have anybody else, or if this person really can tell a story about you that you think nobody else can tell, then that is going to be, that's an acceptable person to use. But I would generally discourage it, both from the standpoint of, I don't think it has the same kind of impact, but also it's a challenge for those, like, those people don't have experience writing those letters. So it's often going to be a pretty significant, commitment and time burden for them, that I would encourage them probably to be, careful about saying yes to. Similarly, we have a fair number of lecturers in the department, people who are not full-time faculty. Are they good letter writers? The answer to that is yes. Having the lecturer title is not going to be a deterrent. That person in this case, treat them like any other faculty member in the department. They would be a perfectly good person to write, and I think we've seen a lot of good letters that have come through from people who are in the department in the role of lecturer. So don't be afraid. But again, that person's going to have other commitments outside of the department, and so it might be more of a time burden than they're prepared to take on. But if they're willing to do it, I wouldn't hesitate to ask them. Trying to think. Well, let me pause here and invite any questions that anybody has, and this will probably keep the conversation rolling.
Hi.
Hi.
Um, so is it better to ask through an email, or would it be better to like set up like a Zoom meeting with the professor, or does it just like depend on the person? Like, what's your opinion on that?
I think it's better to just sort of be upfront in the email about what you want. I think kind of going through the process of setting up a Zoom meeting or setting up an appointment only for you to kind of sit down and ask, like, hey, could you write a letter for me? It has that sort of feeling of like, could this just have been an email exchange? You know, if that's all we really need to accomplish here. What I would say in the email is ask if, you know, if wait, send the email, make the request. If the person says yes, then ask if you can have an appointment or a Zoom with them, so that you can talk more about, you know, what you're hoping to accomplish and what your interests are for grad school. My guess is that they will ask you for that already, but if they don't, I would encourage at least making that request. But I don't think it's, if there's any kind of concern that you're kind of disrespecting the person by emailing the question to them rather than setting up an appointment to ask them directly, I don't think that's a concern at all. So I think I would just be upfront about making the request. And then, because I mean, if you have somebody who's getting requests from 20 or 30 or 40 students, you know, setting up all those Zoom meetings just to meet that requirement is going to be a pretty significant time burden for that person. And instead, they could just kind of rip through a bunch of yeses in the emails and kind of go from there. So I think I would be upfront with the email for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question in the chat: is it valuable to have a certified SLP or audiologist you've shadowed with write you a letter? I think the answer to that is yes. Again, I would treat that as the third or maybe even the fourth letter, depending on who else you have. Um, but I think the key thing there is does the shadowing experience you had, is that going to position that person to be able to talk about why you're going to be good? Shadowing experiences can vary a great deal. You know, if you shadow an audiology with Dr. Whitelaw in our clinic, you know, you're going to almost be like another clinician. She's going to ask you a bunch of questions and kind of really involve you. Whereas, you know, I've shadowed things where it's like you're kind of very literally like a shadow. You know, you're in the corner of the room and all you did was not disrupt anything. So I think you want to make sure that that person has something compelling to say about you based on the experience that you had with them or in conversations that you've had with them. Otherwise, you know, you're going to get a letter that reads something like, this person shadowed with me for X number of hours. They seem to have a lot of the traits that we might be looking for in someone in our field of speech language pathology or audiology, something that, you know, sounds like it could have been generated by an AI generator, instead of something that's a really compelling pitch for why you're going to be a particularly talented person. And that's not a negative reflection on you. It's not a negative reflection on the person who's writing the letter. It just might mean that you didn't have the opportunity to make the kind of connection with them that would have made a real impact. We will see in your activities on SIDCAS that you did that shadowing. So if this is just, you know, if the goal is to communicate to the reviewer that you did the shadowing, there are going to be other places in SIDCAS that will accomplish that. So I would only really call on that person if there's something additional that they have to say about you, where they can speak to the fact that you're going to be a good graduate student and or a good clinician. Next question on the chat was, what do you think grad school is specifically looking for in the letters? Is if a professor specifically asks you what you want in a letter, what is generally a good thing to include? To say what I think grad school is looking for in the letters is a really hard question to answer. This, you know, Ohio State is the only place I've ever really worked. It's the only place I've ever done reviews. So I don't totally know what other places might really be interested in. And even within an institution, you know, you're going to be, the letters are going to be read by different people. And it's kind of whatever really catches their eye or really intrigues them. So if the question is, what do you want in the letter? I think it's, think about it from the standpoint of, you know, what, if someone was just going to write on the back of a cocktail napkin, they're reading the, you know, I'm sitting at a restaurant. I have my laptop open. I'm reading through applications to grad school, and I'm jotting down a note on the back of a cocktail napkin. And I have one sentence to summarize, each person that I'm looking at. What's the thing you want summarized about you? And that will be reflected in your personal statements for sure. But what is the part of the story that you think is the most interesting and the most compelling thing about you? And again, it might be something like you have, an incredible work ethic, but it might also be, this person worked jobs to pay their way through undergrad. This person has a unique story that doesn't get captured someplace else, or it's being repeated from what they told me in the personal statement. It doesn't, it can be anywhere. But what's the big takeaway that you want someone to have about you? And that's where I would start in the conversation that I'm having with my faculty letter writer is, what's the thing I wish people knew about me that I think is going to make them think that I'm a good person to go to grad school, go to their grad program. The next question was, does the shadowing have a pretty big weight on the application? Do you think it would work against us not to have shadowing experience? The answer to that question is no. I don't think it's going to be held against you. Um, for the most part, I think what you want to convey in your personal statement and your letters is, why does this person want to be a speech language pathologist or audiologist? And why do you think they have the capability of being successful? And if the shadowing experience is a part of that narrative, that will be helpful. But I don't think anybody as a reviewer is going to start ranking their applications based on, did they have shadowing experience or didn't they? How many hours of shadowing experience did they get? There are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't have shadowing experience. Something as simple as you went to Ohio State and you're one of 75 graduates, so you're competing for all the same shadowing experiences. You might be working a job after school, you might be studying after school. There might be a lot of reasons why this wasn't the right thing for you to do. And so, no, I don't think if you haven't been done shadowing that's going to be held against you. It can be an asset. Again, I think if you had an experience that was really meaningful, if you saw something that was really compelling, that helped you decide what you wanted to do or what aspect of the field you wanted to practice in. But the idea that that's going to be some sort of minimum expectation for anyone to be considered for acceptance into a program, that certainly isn't the case. Thank you. Other questions that's on your mind? So let me speak a little bit about the procedural side of everything. So um, you've made the request of your letter writer. They've accepted. The one thing I would always keep an eye on is just, for most of us, we are going to run pretty close to the deadline for submitting those letters on your behalf. I tell people every time that when I write them I usually the Monday before Thanksgiving is the time that I set aside to do that. Um, so I think there is often some anxiety from the students about, like, they there might be a reason why you need the letter in earlier. Unless that reason is really compelling, you kind of want to just go with whatever the person's going to do. You can be pretty confident that, I mean, if they said if it's December 15th, I wouldn't be sending anybody a reminder about anything until December 1st, when there's maybe 2 weeks left before the deadline. Um, but I mean, I've had people who've set, like, you kind of just put into Sidcast, this is when I want the letter done. And so you'll be getting these automated reminder emails in like early October. And it's like, man, I'm not going to be able to do this in early October. Like, that's not the schedule that I'm on. So if you are, submitting to a place that has an earlier deadline, be sure to let somebody know that. But in general, the deadline for most places is going to be in mid-December. And once you've been offered admission into a place, you're going to have until mid-April to make your decision. So almost anything else outside of those deadlines is going to be um, not a real thing, not a thing that you actually have to worry about. And so kind of build it out from the December 15th deadline, and then expect the person to kind of respond on that timeline. The only other thing I would point out about that is if you are submitting anywhere that isn't going to be using SIDCAS, so if it's a place that requires an individual letter, please let your letter writer know that that's coming. Um, Most of the the prompts, the email prompts that we get for those letters, most of the time they come through to our inbox, but it's not out of the question that they would go to a junk email folder. And so if we don't know that they're coming, it would be pretty easy for us to miss it. So most of the time, most people, it's just like all straight SIDCAS now. But if there are still a few schools that are going to want like a separate submission process. And if you're applying to any of those places, just let your letter writer know. I have, there's going to be a SIDCAS request, and then there's going to be this one from this institution or that one from that institution. But it doesn't matter like how many schools you're applying to in SIDCAS. The process is the same if you're applying to one or if you're applying to 60 in SIDCAS. We're just going to upload the letter to SIDCAS, fill out like the Likert scale stuff in SIDCAS, and then they're going to send it out to whoever, whatever schools you're applying to. But if there are any institutions outside of SIDCAS, please highlight that. We don't want to miss something that we should be on the lookout for. Similarly, if your plans change at all, update your person on that. Like if you were going to apply to a place that has an extra letter process and then you changed your mind or something changed and you didn't apply there, just let your person know, hey, I had intended to apply here, but you're not going to get that email prompt. Otherwise, I usually have a list of notes that I'm going through, and it's like, wait, I never got something from the University of Texas or whatever the case may be. And then I reach back out, and then the person's like, oh yeah, I decided not to apply there. Do the courtesy of sending that out to the letter writers and just let them know, hey, this message I told you was going to come, don't expect that, it's not going to come. That way we can kind of keep our books straight and we know that we've responded to everything that you guys need. It used to be a lot more for us to keep track of. It used to be, when I started working here, really, but when SIDCAS was just starting out, it would be oftentimes 8-9 different places that you had to submit letters to. And that was a pretty significant process just in kind of keeping track of everything. It's a lot easier now, but if there are other places, that's something that you want to keep an eye on. Yeah, go ahead. Ask the question. I see in the chat there. If you want to unmute yourself, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think I probably missed this part because I missed the first part of the meeting. But for people that aren't currently seniors, like we would be applying, not this calendar year, but the next, what would what would the timeline look like for asking for those letters back? Like, would it be okay to ask for those earlier if we have a teacher that we don't currently have, or?
Yeah, I wouldn't ask before like spring. I would say if it's spring of year 3, that's not a bad time to ask, because then it'll be like 4 months later or 5 months later or something like that you'll actually need the letter. Most of the time when I get requests like that, I can answer and say, yeah, I'll be happy to, but check back with me, remind me of what we're doing again in September or when the semester starts. Because I can often just, I'll have to go back through my emails if I get something from SIDCAS saying like, hey, this person has identified you as a letter writer. Then I'm going backwards through my emails to figure out when did I talk to this person and what is it that they need. So I would just kind of, if you want to plant your flag on that in spring and just say like, hey, can I, would this be cool if for you to write a letter for me in the fall? I think that's fine. If it is something that you feel like you're engaging with a professor kind of in the course of this semester, you're having a great experience with one of your professors at the end of the term. If you say, hey, I'm going to be applying for grad school next year, are you cool with me reaching out to you about writing a letter? Those kind of questions you can definitely ask. But I think most of us kind of chunk the letters together for like, what do I need to submit in autumn of 2024? And so you'll definitely want to follow up and make sure that, hey, we talked about this last year. I'm just following up to make sure you're still cool with me, with writing a letter for me, this coming cycle. So, at the beginning of the autumn term, I think is when you really want to lock those in and make sure you have everybody lined up. Sorry, that was a long answer to your question.
Oh no, it answered it though. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So I know traditionally it's looked forward to ask for letters, definitely earlier on, like especially in September. For students who may have, like, let's say they have two very solid professors that they want to ask for a letter of recommendation, but they just came into a course this, like, their senior year, and they have a professor that they're really connecting with, and they want to ask them, but they don't want to wait too late. Do you feel like there's a good cutoff to when you should or should not ask? Or do you think even if you've had like 3 sessions with this professor and you're like, I really feel like I'm connecting really well with them, when do you think is like a deadline to wait until to ask, if that makes sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, I can speak for myself and say, like, I don't, there's not going to be a situation where I feel like someone's jumped the gun and been like, hey, we barely know each other. What are we doing here? Like, that's it. So the too early part of it, I don't think is something to worry about. Probably what's to be conscientious of is more what you're asking about, which is what is too late. Um, I think probably like the end of September is probably about what I would wait for. I would expect most of my roster of letters to be locked down by the end of September. If you wait much into October, I mean, they still have plenty of time to write it, but it feels a little bit like the person is scrambling because they lost a game of musical chairs or something, right? And it's like, how far down the list am I that they had to come to me, that kind of thing. Which I isn't even again necessarily a problem, but I think I would say by the end of September would be the time to do it. That's a little bit of my own. I'm speaking more on my own behalf than maybe anybody else's. Certainly, the longer that you wait, the more risk there is. If it's a popular course or a popular instructor, that they might have been booked up by then and might not have a spot to write for you. But I think I'd be surprised if they were booked up by the end of September. And I feel like that gives you enough time that, you're 6 or so weeks through your course. I feel like you probably have been able to distinguish yourself in the class by that time, such that the person's going to have pretty good confidence that you're going to be somebody who's good enough that they feel like they can write something really positive about you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions relating to the process on anybody's mind? Anything not expressly letters of recommendation related that I can answer for you? Let me just finish up one more time by plugging myself as an option for you if you need somebody. I know how good our undergrad program is. I know how good our undergraduate students are. So even if I haven't had you in class, if there's something I can do to help you with this process, including writing a letter for you, I'd be happy to do that. My goal is to see you all get to the places that you want to get to, and if there's a way for me to help you do that, please lean on me. Um, um, I tell people, if you ask for a letter from me, I'm not going to say no. And so I will, be happy to do that. But I think you'll have a good response from our faculty in general. I think we are all universally invested in seeing you succeed and getting to the next level. So if there are any other things that I can help you with in this process, don't hesitate to reach out to me. my last name, Bielefeld.6. Please email me anytime if you have questions about the process, if there are anything that I can give you advice about. Talking about kind of going to grad school and the career decision-making process is one of my favorite things to talk about with people. So I'm always eager to hear about where you land and what successes you're having. So, please, and if there's any sort of myths that I can dispel for you, sometimes you just need someone to tell you, hey, you're in a really good spot. A lot of our students, most of our students wind up choosing between multiple options. I'm always surprised by how good our students are and how anxious all of you are that you're not going to get in anywhere. And so if you just need someone to tell you, hey, you're going to be great, this is going to be something that you can do, go right ahead. Another question that came in, if there's a professor that isn't the best at responding to emails, but I connected really well with, do you think they will write a bad letter? Very busy. I like her, but not the best communicator. If that person said they would write for you, I would be confident that they will write for you. So some people are just bad emailers. It doesn't mean that they won't follow through with the letter. That is not something in the 15 years that I've been here, that's not a situation that I've ever heard about from anybody that, I asked this person to write for me. They said they would, and then they just didn't do it. So no, I don't think that means that the letter that they write is going to be bad either. People, I think, especially people who are slow responders, like we have people in the department, we have people across every profession who get kind of overwhelmed by their email inboxes and just get bad at writing back on stuff. I would still use that person if they said yes. So if they give you any indication that they can't, or it's going to be a real burden because of how busy they are, then, give them the option of like, say to them, hey, I don't, I'm happy to go to somebody else if you'd rather I do that. But if they say, no, I can write for you, I think you should have confidence that they will. All right, everybody. Thank you for coming on. Please reach out to me anytime if you have any questions about this process. Again, I'm always open for business. I'm happy to help you in any way that I can. Thanks for taking the time. Good luck with your applications. Just keep in mind, almost all of our students have success at the next level, and you're probably going to be one of them too. So don't expect the worst. Expect the best.
Sorry, I'll jump in here one last time. If this,
Yeah.
oh, you can't see me, sorry. Okay, if this takes up too much of your time, I can totally email you later.
No, please.
I'm the president of NISLA this year for our student chapter, and I'm holding like a super informal, like very similar like grad school presentation, just a small like guide to graduation applications as someone who's like currently doing it, because I think that might make it a little bit like, okay, like there's another person here who like understands. Just like someone to piggyback off of that is like another student who's actively going through the process, because I know that sometimes in the undergraduate level that can be really stressful for students to not feel like they have other students to lean on.
Sure.
So like outside of letters or even inside of letters of recommendation, do you have any other like pieces of advice that you would like, oh yeah, I totally want to throw it into your presentation, or if you would throw this in, like don't stress, take deep breaths. This is, anything that you feel like you would add in if you have any words of advice.
I mean, I think the most important thing, there's two reasons to be stressed, right? The first one is when the stakes are high. The second one is when you're not prepared to be successful. And I think a lot of times our students kind of conflate one with the other, and they start to believe that they're not prepared to be successful when what they're nervous about is because the stakes are high. And I'm not going to pretend that the stakes are not high. Like, this is the next level of your career. This is what the next 2 to 4 years of your life are going to be. So the stakes are definitely high, but I would always want to remind our students that almost all of them are really well prepared to be successful at the next level. And then from a technical standpoint, it's pretty rare at this point, but I would say with your personal statements, with the things that you write, you just want to make sure that they are impeccably clean.
Okay.
The story itself is in some ways less important than the execution of the story and the way that you write it. So if there are anything with like punctuation or grammar errors, stuff like that, those are really easy errors to fix. And so if you submit them, it means you just didn't read it over enough times. You didn't get someone to read it over for you. That's a pretty easy flaw to fix, and I would encourage anybody to do that.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for doing this. That would be,
Yeah.
I think it'll be a great. The other thing I might just give you a piece of it suggestion is if you can find any of our grad students, I think it might be helpful for the undergrads to hear from people who not only went through the process, but went through the process all the way to being admitted and being a part of a grad program.
Yeah.
I think they would have insights into this that none of the faculty can have because we've never done it. You know, we didn't go through the
Yeah.
CITCAS process. So I'm sure that there were a lot of them who would be very eager to help out in that way.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.
Good night, everybody. Thanks again for coming on. It was a pleasure to talk to you.